Hey guys, this is Lucas from Better Coding Academy, and in this video I'm going to be explaining the useRef React hook, or more generally I want to be talking about refs in React and exactly how they work and when you should and shouldn't use them. I get a lot of questions surrounding refs because, to be fair, they are a pretty difficult concept to understand. Sometimes they're used on DOM elements, sometimes they're just used on plain data, and they always seem to have like a .current property. Like, what's the deal with all of that? I'm going to try and break down all of that information in this video here and hopefully give you an explanation on how exactly you should be using refs. And I actually want to show you that refs aren't as complicated as you might think they are, and I want to explain how they cleverly use some basic JavaScript principles to keep a sort of state or a sort of memory within your React application. So let's just jump straight into it here. I've got run.js open, and I'm not going to be typing React code. I'm just going to be typing in an object, and I'm going to be demonstrating something to you in this object here. So this is what I want to show you here. For example, let's just say that we have an object. So this is our object, and we have obj, and inside of obj we have a property called name, and the name we have is Lucas. Semicolon goes here. So then if I do obj.name, then the value we get over here is Lucas. So that makes sense. That's pretty clear. That's just the string value inside of an object. Now, as you might understand, let's turn this into a console log. My one here does like automatic evaluation, which is why it still outputs without console log, but we're just going to do this here. And then let's do obj.name is equal to, and let's change it to Lucy, for example. And then let's copy paste this, put this down here, and we get Lucas and then Lucy. So that makes sense. We first get obj.name, which is Lucas, we change it to Lucy, and then we output Lucy onto the page. So this is all self-explanatory, and you might be wondering, why are you explaining this when we're trying to talk about refs? Well, this is the most important part of a ref, is an object, and the fact that you can change properties inside of an object. Now that's really important, and I want to expand upon this example a little so you can understand where I'm going with this. So now, instead of calling this one name, we're going to change the structure here a little. And it's going to be a bit weird, but just bear with me for now and I'll explain what we're trying to do. So first thing we're going to do is change this name from obj, we're going to change it to name ref. So this is an example of a ref. And instead of calling this one name, we're going to call this one current. So we're just going to go with this for now. Don't ask too many questions as to why, but just keep watching and I guarantee you I'll explain what's going on. Okay, so now that I've got this, we can do the same thing. If we do console.log name ref.current, then the value we get back is Lucas. So that's all fine. But what we're going to actually do now is we're going to create two functions. Now the name of the first function we're going to be calling my component. Now this is we're writing it this way because I'm trying to show you what this would be like a component, or give you basically a boiled down version of how React does it. Now I'm going to be running this as a function. You should not run your React components like functions, and you also shouldn't write your functions with a capital letter at the start. But I'm going to be breaking both of those rules here just to show you an example of kind of how React does it in their backend. So we've got my component here, and my component is just a function. It's not actually a component here. And inside of here, we're going to do console.log name ref.current. So we do something like that, and we get rid of that. And you see, if we run my component here, which I forgot to do, then we still get Lucas. So that's fine. We just added a little bit more complexity there. But let's add in another function now, and let's call this one useRef. So we're actually going to do const useRef is equal to, and this one is going to return something pretty cool. Now we're going to grab nameRef here, and we're going to call this one const magic store of all refs. So you might be able to guess what exactly we're trying to do here. I'm just trying to show a very boiled down example of how React stores its data internally. And we're going to do that by having an object here called magic store of all refs. And inside of here, we obviously have our name ref. So the name ref just belongs inside of there. So that just puts the object inside of here. It's just shorthand for writing this twice. So it's the same thing, but we're just going to write that there. So inside of useRef, what we're going to do, just to keep things simple, is we're going to do return magic store of all refs. And instead of like returning whichever one depending upon the component or something special, which React obviously does, we're just going to return directly name ref. So we're going to return exactly this one into this component here. So now instead of doing name ref.current like this, what we're going to do is we're going to call this one something like, I guess, name ref invisible. We're going to grab this one and we're going to save that in the name here. And the reason I do that is just so it becomes undefined, so we can't do this here. And once we do that, then inside of here, let's do const name ref is equal to useRef. So now we have a useRef here, and we can do name ref.current when we run my component. So I'm going to just kind of stop there for a second, and let's just go through the code, and I'm going to explain a little of what I'm trying to say here. So these three methods here, are a very, very, very boiled down example of what React does internally. So internally inside of React, this one here doesn't really count. I guess this is like a default state, which you might represent here for like the name Lucas, which is the default string value. But what we've got here is this is our, I guess, default ref value. As you can see, I've put on a suffix just so you can see that it's invisible. It's not meant to be able to be directly accessed by my component. So we've got name ref invisible, we've got magic store of all refs, and we've got our useRef function here. So these three, if we do a little section here, we can kind of block this off, and we can say that this section here specifically is for our internal React magic. So the exact way this part works doesn't really matter. So this part here, it's not really important for you to know the exact implementation details in order to understand useRef. You can look into that all you want, but that's not what we're going to worry about here. So we have kind of these three functions, but this is an example of our component. So now inside of our component, when we access nameref and we do nameref equals useRef, the first time around, we're going to get a default value. Now in our case here, let's just say that if this were an actual component, we might do default value is Lucas. So then when we do nameref.current, we get Lucas. So this would be kind of how it works, and this value would be stored internally inside of React's magic store. You don't have to worry about how exactly it's stored, but it's important that you know that it's stored in there. It would be stored something like this inside of an object somewhere inside of React. And then we get that back and we get it inside a nameref. And if we want to access that same value, Lucas, we do nameref.current. If we want to change that value, we simply do nameref.current is equal to, say, Lucy. And once we do that, this one's still going to show Lucas, but then assuming this is a component render, imagine this is a render. If we were to do this again, you see this time around, the value is Lucy. Now the reason now it's Lucy is because we did nameref.current equals Lucy, but this value is preserved. So that's the main thing I want to talk about here. The reason that React uses an object and the reason they use a current property is because when you have an object like this, one object is maintained throughout the whole component lifecycle. As long as you're not creating new objects, every reference to nameref or whatever that object is can be modified as long as you use a property inside of it, like .current. For example, if I were to change this, change the way we did this, and say we did something like let name equals Lucas, because people ask me this a lot as well, is like, why can't we just use, let variables inside of our components? Well, you see, when you do console.log name like this, and then let's do name equals Lucy, and let's comment out these 3 lines of code here, then you see what happens is we actually get Lucas twice, because this component, when it re-renders, it's kind of like this. It actually runs the whole function. React reruns the whole function. And when that happens, you lose all of your constants and all of that data. So everything inside of the component gets basically washed away, sort of. Not exactly, because garbage collection and all of that is a separate topic, but basically all of that data goes away, and then we get new variables. We have a new name variable, and we have new stuff kind of getting populated inside of here. So that's what's happening here. When we run my component for the first time, we get let name equals Lucas, we console log that, we set it to Lucy, and then all of that kind of disappears into thin air. And then when we run it a second time, we get a new name variable, also called name, also inside my component, but this time the second time around, and we console log that value again, which is also Lucas, and then we change that value again to Lucy. So this will not work, and that's why it shows Lucas twice. So you really can't store data inside of your component this way. So let's comment this out, go back to here, and I want to explain again why this works. Because when we do useRef here, what React actually does is it actually tracks the order of your hooks. So inside of a component, you might have, say, 2 use states, so use state 1, use state 2, and then you might have useRef1. So then React tracks that and it says, oh, okay, so inside of this component here, we have useState1 and we have useState2, and then we have useRef1. So then inside of React magic store of all of its data, it actually realizes, okay, this is the current value of useState1, this is the current value of useState2, and this is the current value of useRef1. So basically all of those values are put into their respective locations, and then you can use them inside of your component. So even when your component re-renders, you still have the latest value of useState and useState here, obviously, but then with useRef, you can do the same thing. Now, the way useState works is we actually have to run a function setState, the setState function. So like, for example, const name setName, and you'd have to run setName equals, say, useState Lucas. Now, this we don't actually always want to do. So that's the difference between state and ref in this case, is that when you use state, whenever you run setName or the setState function, it actually re-renders your component. But in some cases, you actually don't want to re-render your component, and I'll be showcasing that in a later part of this video. But for now, what you need to understand is we have const nameref equals useRef Lucas. It grabs back an object, and because it's an object and objects are passed by reference, when we do nameref.current equals Lucy, this actually mutates the object value and it stores it until the next render. So that way the value persists every single time that the component re-renders, and it works just fine. So now let me show you a practical example of where you would use useRef as opposed to useState. Okay, so I've got a default code sandbox open over here. If you don't know what code sandbox is, you're kind of missing out. It's super duper cool. Just go to codesandbox.io and you get this full sandbox where you can type React code and just get stuff running really, really quickly. It's good for prototyping and also good for making videos. So that's what I'm doing here. We're going to be putting a button here on the page. So let's just do, say, button here. I'll give it a class name of super big or something like that. And I'm just going to write, like, say, click me, just so I can show you this button here in this video more clearly. So let's just maybe get rid of the H2. We don't need that. And let's go into stars.css, do super big here. And let's just increase the font size to, say, 100 pixels, just for the sake of argument. So we've got that one over here, and now we have this massive button, which we can click, and then it says Hello Code Sandbox here at the top. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be implementing this button so that when I click on it, it's going to load something different in the H1 here. So let's kind of get that set up. First thing we'll do here is a use state. So use state there, and let's put in a state here for the counter. So const, let's just do counter, comma, set counter equals use state, and we'll start it off at 0. So this is the default count value. It's going to be 0. This one here is going to be counter there like that. And then if I save, I don't need to save, and I do click me, nothing happens, but it shows count 0 at the top. Okay, so let's get this thing working here. So maybe let's just do on click here. And when we do on click, we can just put in a little thing here. And then let's just say set counter and then counter +1 or something like that. So then what we can do is we can click this and counter will go up. So this is a very simple counter, and it works relatively well because we can just increment that value there. But now let's think about how we would do this if we wanted to also store the previous counter's value. So right now we're doing counter +1, everything is fine. But what if I change this implementation just a little, just to demonstrate for the example here. So if we do, let's just say math.floor, or let's just do math.ceil, math.random times 10. So if I do something like this, this will give me a random number between 1 and 10 every single time. Now, let me ask you this question. How would we show the previous value of the counter? It's actually not that difficult, but I'm going to show you today a solution using useRef. So let's get useRef here. So we have useRef and useState, and we're going to call this one previous counter. And previous counter, I usually like to write ref at the end, just so I know that it's a ref. I put useRef here, and the default value is going to be null. So if I actually do console.log previous counter ref, this will kind of correspond with what I talked about earlier in the video as well, where we have a current object. So you see over here we have an object and the current value is just undefined. I thought it was null, that's my bad. But the default value is undefined. Now, it's an object with a current property, and the reason they do that is so you can mutate the object in a safe controlled environment, and then this value will be persisted across component renders. So we have a previous counter here, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to write previous counter ref.current. We can probably just like type of previous counter ref.current is not equal to undefined. If it's not undefined, then we're going to show h2, and let's just say previous count, and what is previous here probably looks better, and we can put in previous counter ref.current like so. So we have an h2 here, and currently obviously it doesn't render because it's undefined. If we were to put, say, 15 in here, then the number 15 would render underneath. Or at least it should. So what's happening here? Let's refresh. Yep, okay. So it's count 0, and the previous value obviously is just 15 because that's what I've hard coded here. So now we're going to turn this off. We're going to get rid of that, and that's going to disappear here as well. But what we're going to do now is add in a use effect. So now let's go here and let's do use effect. And basically this use effect is going to run every single time that our counter changes. So when our counter changes, and this includes when it renders for the first time, when we have a new counter value, what we do is we store that value in the previous counter. So we do previous counter ref.current is equal to counter. So now let's save this. And let's go over here, let's refresh, make sure that's loaded, do click me, click me, click me, and you see it's working just fine and it has the previous value stored. So let me explain quickly how this works. We've got over here a counter and this value starts at 0. And this one runs first, so we'll just say this one is #1, so this runs first, and then this one runs, right? So this one's #2, it also runs and the previous counter value is undefined. Now this section of code is not number 3. This is not the third thing to run, and I'll explain how this works in just a second. But this return statement here kind of is the third thing to run. So first this one runs, and then this block of code here. So then when this runs, it will run this bit of code and it'll say, oh, actually previous counterref.current is still undefined. Remember, it's still undefined from number 2, and then this will not render. So that's why the default value, we get no previous. So now after number 3 here, after this return statement runs, React actually renders this component onto the page. So let's refresh here, we've got count 0, and it renders the component onto the page. Once it does that, this function runs. So this one is actually number 4. So number 4 runs after the component has been rendered onto the page. And this one keeps showing because the component doesn't reload properly. Don't worry about this for now. But anyways, what happens here is previous counterref.current is set equal to counter. Now at number 4, what is the value of counter? Well, at this point, counter is equal to 0. Counter 0 here because that's what counter was at number 1 and we haven't changed it yet. So now this is still the first component render and previous counterref.current is set equal to 0. Now when it's set at this point, that does not trigger a component re-render. So what that means is that the previous 0 will actually not get rendered onto the page. Like I said, don't worry about this. This one just keeps reloading using hot reload, and that's buggy and broken. So don't worry about that. Basically, it doesn't run first time round. It just still shows count 0, even though our previous counterref.current is now equal to 0. And if it were 0, it would show, but the issue is that we haven't re-rendered our component. So anyways, now that we've done this, what we do here is now this line of code runs when we click me. So we click me, and now count is equal to 1. So once that runs, this one here is number 5. So number 5, we run set counter and we set the value of counter to 1. So once we do that, what happens is the number 1 gets sent into React's magic little store. And once it gets sent into there, it updates the value of counter. Remember what I said before, our hooks are in a defined order and React remembers that order. So it says, okay, so then the first use state inside of app got set to the number 1, and it realizes that and it sets that inside of its internal magic state, and it calls an update on the component. So then this component re-renders, and when it re-renders, we get a new value of counter, which is equal to 1. So basically this whole app function gets rerun inside of React, and what that does is that throws away the old values of counter and previous counterref. It throws all of these constants away, but then we get new constants with their new values. So we have a new constant counter, which is now equal to 1. Our previous counterref, like I said before with useRef, it still keeps its old value because we keep that same object inside of React's memory. So now counter is equal to 1. So over here, this is number 6. Counter is now set to 1. Now counter is 1. What is previous counterref? Well, previous counterref, like we did in number 4, it's still equal to 0. Well, it's equal to an object that contains the property current that is equal to 0. So that's still stored here. This one, I guess, is number 7, but the value is still the same. So this one here is still 0. This one here is now 1. And now this one runs again. So this one's number 8. And on number 8, the component... let's try this one again because it's buggy. We do count 0, click me, now it's 3, previous is 0. So basically it renders the previous value, which is the current value inside of previous counterref. Remember what we said at number 4, this one here is 0. So we render 0 onto the page, but then after this one, after number 8 runs, that is this return statement, then we run the use effect again. So this one here is number 9. Now when number 9 runs, this previous counterref.current sets equal to the current counter. And the current counter is equal to 3. Remember what I said before? So now this one is 3. So when we refresh the component again, the previous value will be 3. So let me showcase that over here. Currently, our counter is 0. Previous counterref is undefined. I click, and then counter is 5. Previous counter is 0. Click me again. Count is 3. Previous counter shows as 5. But then you've got to understand that when the component, after the component re-renders, after this return part runs, then the use effect runs again. So actually, after the use effect finishes, the previous counterref and the counter both have the same value. It's just that this is not persisted onto the page, so it's not actually rendered. So this is an example of how you would use ref. So then you might be wondering, why is useRef also used for DOM elements? Like sometimes you see people do, like for example, const header ref or something like that, and then header ref, say we do useRef, and then we might do h1 ref equals header ref. Well, actually what's going on here is it uses that exact same mechanism. So this one here starts off as current undefined, but then when we get to line 16 over here, what actually happens is it basically, this ref property which is built in, React DOM actually grabs the header ref and it sets the current value equal to the h1 DOM element. So it actually does that for you. And what's really cool about that is you can do some wacky stuff with that DOM element. So when we run on click here, this one will have already been defined. So then we can do header ref dot current, and we can do something dodgy, like style dot background color is equal to red. And then let's save that real quick. And once we do that, refresh over here, we can do click me, and you see now that one becomes red because header ref.current is set equal to that DOM element. So that's really all it is. The DOM element is actually just a really, really thin API on top of the existing ref API, which itself is also pretty thin. So it just takes the current value and it sets it equal to that DOM element, which allows us to access it, work with it, and use that to also integrate other JavaScript libraries and cool stuff like that. So I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope that I've cleared up a few things surrounding the useRef hook. This has been Lucas from Better Coding Academy, and see you guys later.